Diese Konferenz wird nun aufgezeichnet.
Welcome to today's Tuesday Talk and webinar on 5 years of the multi-tier framework to measure energy access, practices, lessons learned, outlook for cost-efficiently tracking progress towards the Sustainable Development Goal number 7 on ensuring access to affordable and clean energy for all. Today's session will be facilitated by Natalia Carrillo, who is the current Closed Tab for Sustainability Fellow at the ISS. She is an engineer by training, and she has been working on energy-related questions for more than a decade now. In addition, she is the co-founder of the Berlin-based company Hedera. She will be joined by Sebastian, Groh, Shonali, Pachauri, and Gunther Bensch, who will introduce themselves shortly. Just as a quick reminder, this session, like usual, will be recorded. And now with this very brief introduction, I would like to hand over to our today's moderator, Natalia. Please.
Thank you very much, Achim. Welcome, everybody. I will jump to the main question, why are we here? And all started with a very basic question, was, is it energy access, electricity access, or for cooking solution, a binary metric? Is it a to have or not to have? And this image has been accompanying us, researchers that have been working on the topic of energy access. Well, that it is not a fact of access of this dichotomy, but it has been a work that has been gathering several entities around the world for proposing different indicators. For instance, Mikul Bhatia at the meeting in 2013 of the Sustainable Renewable Energy Program, he was explaining what were the past approaches for measuring energy access and different methodologies: single indicator, dashboard of indicators, composite index, multi-tiers, which already for a decade have been proposing methodologies on how to deal with this problematic, that at the end it will guide policymakers and different programs on designing strategies for improving energy access at national level. In 2015, and that's why we are talking about this 5 years, was launched the multi-tier framework by the Energy Sector Management Assistance Program, meaning that before, when we were talking about no access to access, actually it is a whole range of attributes and tiers of access, saying that having energy access is a matter of improving different attributes of energy supply, leading to higher tiers of access. A household can be totally in dark or have different types of appliances or abilities to enjoy energy services, and this will lead to the different tiers. This work, or this methodology, is from the multi-tier framework launched by the ESMAP with different stakeholders. And the definition is the ability to avail energy that is adequate, available when needed, reliable, of good quality, convenient, affordable, legal, healthy, and safe for all required energy services. This new definition has also bring along some critics or some aspects that have to be considered. For instance, how the energy index is calculated, how complex is the data collection in order to gather the necessary information to be able to calculate the index and to assess energy access at national level, as well as proposed by Fraunhofer and the Institute for Resource Efficiency and Energy Strategies on proposals for expanding the tier ranking for measuring energy access. Today, I have brought 3 researchers, experts that I admire personally their work. Gunther Bensch from the Leibniz Institute for Economic Research. I'll now introduce them officially: a development economist with broad experience in the energy access space, and he's researcher in the Climate Change in Developing Countries Department at RWI, and also partner at the consultancy ECHO. And his research interest lies in the empirical investigation of markets for environmental goods and technologies, as well as the socioeconomic effects of development measures such as improved cook stoves. He wrote back in 2013, 2014, now the paper that launched also some investigations on comparing different metrics. Sebastian Groh, now in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, he is passionate to drive the 5 Ds or fueling of our energy future: decentralization, decarbonization, disruption, democratization, and digitization. I think this is very good, compelling words that describe the work of Sebastian, founder of Solskjaer and also associate professor at Brack University, who has also conducted his PhD on the multi-tier framework, among other different topics in his collection of articles, and will also share with us his views and experience on this metric. And Shonali Pachauri, who is current acting director of the Transitions to New Technologies program and senior researcher scholar in the energy program at the Institutional Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, based in Vienna, in Austria, but now today from India, in Delhi. She's with us and will be joining us with this conversation, proposing also an alternative framework based on this multi-tier framework. So with this introduction, I give you, Gunther, the word, and how it will work today and for everybody is that each person will share with us what has been the experience, what is the outlook, what is the current discussion around the multi-tier framework. First Gunther, then Sebastian, and then Shonali, and then we will go through 4 questions that have concerned us today on what will be the way forward in order to disseminate and make feasible the implementation of a common language to track energy access. Gunther, the virtual floor is yours.
Okay, well, thanks and a warm welcome also here from Cologne. I think Natalia already quite well summarized my work, but let me just say a few words before I come to my opening statement on the multi-tier framework about the different fields of research we are working on and where we actually encountered, well, let's say common grounds with the multi-tier framework. And this is what you see in the middle panel here. So, I mean, what we call the economics of energy access is basically at the centerpiece of our research. So we address different questions regarding energy access, so cook stoves, electrification, and all that, mostly from an economic perspective, and then try to make different links to both to other infrastructure types, but then also to more specific topics like labor markets, migration, agriculture, and recently also sought to see what we can learn from the COVID pandemic about let's say about shocks and how they affect the resilience and how energy, but also for example microcredits can help to boost resilience among local populations. And here on the right panel, just a few sample projects. I mean, we can go into those later in the discussion because I would now rather like to really come to the different questions on the multi-tier framework. And here I think yeah, please, next slide. Here I think it makes sense to first of all clarify that we have to think about the multi-tier framework as 2 different things. So one is the multi-tier framework as a metric, and the other is the multi-tier framework as a data collection tool. And so my, let's say, my humble assessment about the last 5 years is that on the positive side, we can say for the metric, we can say that we achieved an improved common understanding of energy ladder aspects in the international discussion, and also made this move from just thinking about energy as energy availability to really look at actual use, because we've seen like different barriers between availability and actual use, and the MTF really made it more clear to look at actual use. But at the same time, we can say that the multi-tier framework is too abstract and it is inevitably normative, which is not a bad thing per se, but this is maybe one reason, together with the incapability of the MTF to capture the complexities of the sector challenges and the interests, that we rather saw little traction of the multi-tier framework. So at the bottom you see a couple of work from the energy policy landscape, and here we can see that the multi-tier framework is not really like completely taken up by these entities. For the multi-tier framework as a data collection tool, here I would say that it helped to contribute to a consolidation of data collection efforts, but again, we see some challenges for the MTF as a data collection tool. The particular challenges are in capturing and in keeping track of this dynamic, but also very heterogeneous energy sector. And also when you talk with people who are in charge of implementing those, generally they are still considered too expensive. So we saw rather little application of this data collection tool. And if yeah, please, if I now try to think about a way forward, or how I would expect things to happen and how I would like to see things continuing, is that there are, let's say, there is a three-pronged approach that we use the MTF metric for defining key indicators, and these key indicators mostly using national survey data, so that we really achieve a comprehensive picture across the globe. And this could then be used to develop a three-level classifications. At least that is what typically comes out in the different approaches, that we see like a basic, a transition, and a modern level, and that would, I guess, be sufficient to get a sense about what is the progress. And then for those countries where we see less progress, we can look more into the challenges, and there I think we just have to also think about let's say alternative, more out-of-the-box approaches to collect data. I mentioned a few here. For example, data loggers on grid reliability is one example, and then the third pillar of this would be to say, okay, in order to also get a better picture of what the impacts are and what impacts we can expect from energy access, here I would rather advocate for, let's say, a few lighthouse evaluations, so evaluations that are designed with really a high level of external validity to address those questions where we would rather think of still existing gaps in the literature. So we still have not a consolidated picture about impacts. Productive use is a topic that many people are talking about, but where we have little evidence, and reliability is a similar topic. So far as my my 2 cents, and yeah, happy to discuss more about this.
Natalia, you're still
Natalia,
muted.
should I jump right in? Or? Oh.
You hear me well?
Yeah.
Yes,
I
okay.
can hear you.
Yeah, I was giving the word to you, Sebastian, and thank you, Gunther, for this intro. Sebastian, you can start.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Natalia. Thank you, Gunther, and also Natalia for basically setting the stage already. It makes my job easier, but my job is also difficult, Natalia, because after me, Shonali is speaking, who was the supervisor of my PhD. So there's a little bit pressure on me here, and rather keep the series short then. And let me also take down the mask. So yeah, welcome everyone. I'm talking to you right now from literally from the cities of Dhaka, Bangladesh. I had a little bit of a hiccup in my time schedule today, but the GSM network is really strong here, so these calls usually work also on the road, but apologies for the honking in the background. So I'm representing BRAC University, which is a concern of BRAC, which is the world's largest NGO, which is headquartered here in Dhaka, Bangladesh, as well as Solskjaer, as Natalia already said, which is in the business of smart microgrids, where we interconnect solar home systems and have people share. Now, topic at hand, if we could go to the next slide. I chose like really simple points. First of all, we are in 2021, so we are 6 years in of the Sustainable Development Goals. They are till 2030, and we are still talking on a binary metric. And Natalia already expressed her dismay over this, and I can only echo that. It's sad to be honest. And the MTF has been proposed, but it's not made its way through as the measurement tool for SDG 7.
We have some problems hearing. Maybe if you can repeat your last sentence, Sebastian. Is it only me or everybody is missing Sebastian?
I think his camera is frozen currently. He may have lost his internet connection, as it looks. Wait, he's moving now.
Yeah, Sebastian, we don't hear you. We see you moving your, yeah. Sebastian, we don't hear you. Not yet. No, and your mic is on, but we don't hear you.
Natalia, in the interest of time, if you like, we could go to me and then come back to Sebastian.
It's a good idea, Shonali. So let's, we hope that by when you finish, then Sebastian will have better internet connection, or maybe you do something with your mic. Shonali.
Yeah, thank you very much, Natalia, for organizing this and also inviting me to present my views here. As Natalia already mentioned, I work with International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, based just outside of Vienna in Austria. And my own research has focused very much on household energy transitions, looking at energy access and energy poverty more broadly, also in terms of sort of multi-dimensional energy poverty and linking the improvement in energy access, looking at the synergies and trade-offs with other sustainable development goals. As the speakers before me have mentioned, I mean, of course, we know that the current SDG 7.1 indicators are still binary, and therefore there has been this strong emphasis on trying to improve the indicators, to make them more multidimensional. And there has been a long tradition now and quite a lot of literature that really aims to move beyond these binary metrics to really increase our understanding of how different attributes of energy supply and aspects of household vulnerability matter for which energy services are utilized. And in particular, this kind of move away from binary to multidimensional measurement, the key motivation for that has been to really increase granularity, to be able to better reveal sort of inequities and injustices in energy provisioning. And this, of course, cannot be measured that accurately by quantitative binary indicators alone. Now, there are some common aspects that the newer conceptualizations of energy access and energy poverty are really trying to achieve. So the first, of course, is to think about access for whom, because I mean, of course, we often talk about access for households, and this, of course, is very essential. But also we know now that access for community services, particularly for healthcare, as we've seen now in the pandemic, is extremely important, as is also access to energy for productive enterprises and productive uses. So when we're talking about access, it's of course important to think about whom we are talking about, access for whom. In addition, we've talked a lot about access, and we talk about access to modern energy services. That's the objective of the goal. But often we're still talking only about energy carriers or energy technologies, off-grid, on-grid, and sometimes we talk about access to the devices that energy uses. But ultimately, we're really interested in looking at how access to the energy and the technologies that energy uses provide people with the services that they desire, right? So that's basically lighting, thermal comfort at home, clean cooking, and so on and so forth. And then when we talk about the purpose of access, again, it's not just consumptive end uses, but also productive and community needs that need to be focused on. And as in the multi-tier framework, a lot of the newer frameworks and measures and indicators of access are really looking at access in multiple dimensions. So not just the connection per se, but then also looking at how affordable the connection is, how reliable the connection is, and what is the quality, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. We've looked a lot at the multi-tier framework. We've tried to apply it in different contexts. Work with Sebastian specifically looked at applying the multi-tier framework in Bangladesh, and in applying it to different countries and learning from these applications, we basically found that the multi-tier framework in its current form is much too complicated for a lot of national governments to apply. And therefore, it needs some kind of simplification and modification to make it more widely accepted and used by national governments. And so in an effort to do that, we've tried to come up with an alternative framework that builds on the multi-tier framework, but makes 2 or 3 important modifications. The first is that we really try to distinguish between aspects of energy supply and user circumstances. Now, this is important because basically we find that there are elements of energy poverty that have to do with the supply of energy, of course, whether the person has a connection, how many hours of the connection of the supply they get, how reliable that supply is, the quality of that supply, and so on. This is, of course, policies to improve this have to be addressed to energy suppliers. But then there are aspects of energy poverty that have to do very much with the circumstances of the end user. So how much income that person has, what is the structure, the kind of housing that they live in, how much insulation they have, for instance, and so on and so forth. And therefore, certain parts of the effort to address energy poverty has to really address some of these sort of structural and user circumstances related factors. So we distinguish between these two dimensions, energy supply dimensions and energy poverty dimensions, as you can see on this graphic here. The other thing we've done in this alternative framework is we've simplified the dimensions. So in the multi-tier framework, of course, there are multiple dimensions that are covered. And while this is very comprehensive, it also becomes very data needy. And therefore, we try to look at specifically the dimensions that are in the SDG goal itself. That's affordability, reliability, and modern energy services. And so we focus specifically on these dimensions. And then furthermore, the third modification is we reduce the number of tiers. So of course, the multi-tier framework in its name itself distinguishes across different tiers of access. And there are again multiple tiers that it distinguishes against. But we simplified this to really distinguish between only 3 tiers, sort of a basic, a decent, and a better. And that's what we have developed in this alternative frameworks. Next slide, please. Then we have currently, we're in the process of applying this alternative framework to a bunch of countries and comparing it also with the multi-tier framework. So we basically applied the alternative framework and the multi-tier framework to the same set of countries. In particular, we started with looking at Ethiopia, Rwanda, and India. And I won't go into details on that because it will take me much too long to go into all the details, but I want to highlight 2 key results from our assessment. One is that the multi-tier framework focuses a lot on electricity consumption or power wattage. Now, of course, this is one indicator of how much service a person is enjoying, but it's an imperfect indicator of services, because you could be using a lot of electricity very inefficiently, but only getting very little service out of it. On the other hand, you might be using a very little energy very efficiently and enjoying a lot more services. So we try to really focus on measuring services, and we use appliance ownership as a proxy for services. Rather than on consumption itself. And basically, when we compared these 2 indicators, we found that consumption is really a poor indicator of services. So, focusing on services is a better way of measuring access. And then the second key takeaway was that affordability is very imperfectly measured in the multi-tier framework. And we also try to improve on this affordability metric. Whereas MTF measures it as the share of budget spent on electricity. We looked at also the share of budget that is spent towards purchasing appliances. So we use discounted cost of appliances, because just the first, the recurrent cost of energy, of course, is a drawback for many households, but the upfront cost associated with the getting appliances is a bigger barrier in many cases for many households. And there again, we found that affordability is a bigger constraint for most households in these countries than is measured by the multi-tier framework alone. So we are now carrying on this work and applying the alternative framework we've developed to many more countries. And we're hoping to publish results on that soon. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Shonali. We will try Sebastian, if you hear us and you can jump again.
Yeah, I'm here. I wasn't aware when I lost you. I kept talking, so you need to help me. Where I should?
Like in the very beginning.
Say again.
In the very beginning.
Oh, in the beginning. Okay. All right. Sorry, apologies for that. Yeah. So I mean, but I'll skip the status today because Shonali gave, as expected, not an imperfect but a perfect summary. So let's go to the next slide from here. To the outlook. Yeah, that's great. So I was thinking about, how do we get the MTF become more applied? And I was thinking, how does the GIZ make me apply the MTF as a practitioner? And that's usually they say, okay, look, Sebastian, I give you that money, but I'll only give it to you if you measure ex ante and ex post on the MTF. And then, of course, I say, yeah, absolutely, I love to do that, right? So, as a simple example, I think in order to get it at the national level more accepted, I think we suggested two things, and Shonali already mentioned, it needs to be less prescriptive and less complex. So why can't there be two parts? One part is what we all globally agree is the minimum what we need to measure. Shonali suggested the three main elements of the SDG 7.1. And then on the national level, it can become more granular and more customized based on the needs of the respective government. But in order to at least enforce this generic national level, global level consensus, which needs to be simplified, I think also funds and development aid from the development organizations need to be more earmarked towards those, towards the measurement of that. That needs to be basically a condition for the funding. But it's just occurred to me when I thought about it, when you asked me the questions, how could we get it more deployed? So that would be one suggestion that that could actually propel this further. And I'll stop with that.
Thanks, Sebastian. Actually, we're hearing you very well. And this, I guess that with this introduction and hearing the positions from each of the experts, we can go to the questions. Like these 4 questions, and I hope like we can have then also time for questions from the audience. I gather these questions as we want to extract from you experts on these proposals on how can we track progress towards the SDG 7 without a common language, and what will be this paving forward. So this is imagining this setup where we have a government now without the support of any international development agency. A national government is planning to do an energy access assessment to review its outdated energy plan and design its country-specific goals. So the question is, what will be your 2 key recommendations for conducting this assignment? Again, without any international development agency and only this country. So Shonali, if you would like to start, and then Sebastian and Gunther.
Yeah, so having worked in this space for the last decade and a half, I think what we see over and over again as the big issue in national energy planning and plans to expand access are 2 things specifically that come to my mind. One is in the assessment of the actual status at the moment. So having a good understanding of what are the patterns of energy use in a particular region or a particular country or whatever today is essential to do any planning for improving the status over the future. So understanding what are the patterns of energy use, how much people spend on energy, where they get their energy sources from, and also to some extent being able to the degree possible given data, do some assessment of the latent demand that people have for energy services. This is critical to really starting to plan for expanding energy access. And often data is scarce in many of these countries, we know that, but increasingly there are new data sources that can be tapped. Publicly available Earth observations, satellite data. There's data from other big data sources that could be tapped. We could even use mobile phones to get citizen reported data and so on. So there are many new opportunities to really get at better data to be able to do this kind of latent demand estimation. The second thing I think that's very critical to doing any such planning, and I mean, this goes beyond the sort of technology and economics and normal stuff that people think about, is to do planning with a slightly longer time horizon. So yes, of course, we want to really get at improving access today, preferably yesterday, but you know, it has to be thought of as a process. So yes, getting a solar lantern to someone who's using a kerosene lantern today is already improvement. But one can't stop just there, right? We want to ultimately give people energy services that improve their livelihoods, improve their well-being. And therefore, one has to think of this, the planning horizon has to be extended. It has to be thought of in a longer term fashion, starting with today, but then extending longer term. So in other words, thinking of, when we're thinking of off-grid solutions, I mean, of course, this is very, very important in many contexts where we know the grid will not be extended anytime soon. But then one needs to think beyond just giving people lights and a mobile charge facility. One has to think about how can we give people enough access through these off-grid technologies that give them the community services and the productive energy also that they need to improve their employment and economic activity. These are sort of the two things that I think of when I think about planning.
Shonali, I see, Gunther, that also Shonali already covered productive uses and its simplification. Would you like to complement, or should we go to the next question? Gunther or Sebastian? We don't hear you. I think your microphone is still off.
I can jump in here, and or Gunther, sorry, you.
Please go ahead.
If you want to go first. Okay. No, I would turn the question a little bit around and ask, why would a government want to do that, right? I mean, you said to overhaul its outdated energy planning. Then the question is, what are the parameters a government is looking at? And I can just speak from the perspective of the government of Bangladesh here. And here, basically, what the government is looking at is, okay, how much is my GDP growth? So what multiple of energy demand will I have accordingly? And they take a rule of thumb there, and that's how much capacity I have to build up. And up to now, we have now almost reached 100%. So the electricity access problem is kind of for them solved. So now they say, oh no, now we have to give them quality electricity. So now they would think further, what does quality electricity mean? And so the measurement would go about that, and you already see that is very, very much customized to the need of this country and will look very different in any other country. So I think so. Your question is right in the sense that yes, it is a very nationalistic perspective. What does the country need in that situation? Gunther, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I may only maybe complement a bit of ideas and take on the ideas that were already mentioned, in the sense that when we do this assessment and try to collect data, then we and if the government is really serious about improving energy access, then it also helps to look at other levels of data collection in order to enhance also the let's say the predictability for the private sector, and to learn about the value chains of the energy products. So that, for example, concerns basic, well, charcoal value chains, learning more about how the value chain for charcoal is, which is like just a very, very crucial energy carrier in, at least in many African and urban African regions. And at the same time, Another aspect that is of high criticality for the private sector is, for example, taxation and import duties, but also regulation in more general. And I guess an energy access assessment should really look at what the relevant products in the sector are faced with in terms of taxes and so on.
So in that case, like having a look not only from the government perspective, but then from the private perspective, not from the private sector, from a bottom-up approach, who's reaching like the target households daily, and they are supplying with energy products. What could be an incentive for them for collecting MTF data, and what recommendations will you provide in terms of balance or minimum information to track? And here, Sebastian, with your experience as energy provider in Bangladesh, what would you say?
Yeah. Well, I already said, you know, the GIZ can kind of compel me to that, but that's not like the incentive is, of course, the carrot is the funding, and that's probably not an ideal setup. Yeah. Sorry, yeah, no, that's not an ideal set. But I'm also honest, like my KPI, none of what is measured in the MTF is my KPI as a private sector company. So what I'm assuming, I say, okay, look, yeah. Sorry?
Of the alternative framework, would one of the KPIs of the alternative framework?
I think also, let me tell you our KPIs. So our KPI is that, just to rephrase, we interconnect individual systems, people can trade electricity. So whenever my battery is full, I can automatically sell it and make money. So my KPI is how much money do my solar entrepreneurs make? My overall KPI is how big is the trade volume, meaning how much, it's a sharing economy platform, how much energy is being traded, which is because my business model is I take a commission on every kilowatt hour being traded. So obviously, the more trade volume is there, the more money I make from a very egoistic point of view. But I would still assume that there is a relationship between more trade volume, more activity on the trading platform means the people are more engaged, and more engagement means more allocation efficiency, because people who have full batteries are trading more and selling to people who don't have anything. So it's much more, and I don't see any of those elements in the MTF, but that's now taking off completely my research hat, and because you asked here, and only putting my hat on as a CEO of SolShare.
Yeah, that's the opinion of private sector. Do you have any other experience? Maybe Gunther from the consulting arena.
Well, I have some experience with with this question, where how to bring these two questions together. On the one hand, the and also creating data for the multi-tier framework, which is basically, as Sebastian also mentioned, is kind of the public good, right? I mean, me as a private enterprise, I don't have too much, maybe not too much interest in that information. And I think I've been involved in one project where that was on results-based financing. So results-based financing, the idea is that companies receive support for selling energy access products ex post, so after they have made the sales. So one crucial aspect of it is to verify these sales by independent agencies, and this process of independent verification was then used to both collect data which is related to the MTF, but then also that helps companies to increase their market intelligence, to learn more about the sector, about customer profiles. So in that sense, this exercise was used to, well, let's say, balance the two interests, and then also make it very relevant and interesting for the companies. And so that was also made them embark on in this exercise.
So there were still some incentives from their side, right?
Exactly. Yeah, sure. Because on the one hand, of course, the RBF incentives themselves, so the money that they receive as results-based financing for after the verification, and then at the same time that qualitative information, the information about the customer base and all that, which created an additional incentive.
For the sake of time and just to advance with these two last questions, and we have here some questions from the audience. How will you envision an ensemble of tools to measure energy access, wash, and food security when these can be combined?
Yeah, well, I mean, all of us have referred to the complexities already of the MTF, right? So obviously, if we want to bring in wash and food security as well, we increase complexity by a factor of I don't know how much. So I mean, in broad brush, I would say the same applies as to what I mentioned in my initial statement, so that we should thrive for this three-pronged approach of having like a very basic set of indicators and then trying to see to combine it with alternative data collection methods. Shonali also mentioned some, I mentioned a few, and then link it with this approach on impact evaluations. And otherwise, my main message, which I would just like to drop here, is that when we talk about the water, energy, food nexus, which is somehow related to this here, I think we should really focus also our attention to a few hotspot topics, like for example, solar irrigation, which will be like a really like a leapfrogging in terms of irrigation of agriculture in many areas, but at the same time, which is an energy source that has zero marginal cost, so people will just pump water until, well, in a way where we really have to see in how far that is sustainable. So just as one example, but there are other hotspot topics which we can discuss later.
Shonali, from the last question, it's in regard to impact, but do you have experience in your energy assessments also combining any topic of water access or food security?
Yeah, I mean, we have done some research in our group on looking again at the energy water land nexus, and specifically not so much from the energy access perspective, but to some extent also sort of looking at areas where multiple vulnerabilities or deprivations kind of overlap. So looking at hotspots regionally, not in terms of thematics as Gunther meant, but really looking at globally, where are regions where you have people who lack access to energy, lack access to water resources, and are food insecure simultaneously. And and of course, these are different issues, different forms of deprivation, but we know very well that the people who suffer from these are often the same. And so, trying to identify these vulnerable areas and vulnerable populations, and then of course the next step being looking at policies and interventions that can help to address all of these vulnerabilities, especially through agricultural improvements, as Gunther also mentioned. So looking at renewable energy for increasing agricultural productivity in these regions would be sort of a very key area of intervention that would be important.
And with this, using this MTF, now would you think would be possible to measure impact?
So, I mean, I think the MTF was not originally designed to measure impact, but the surveys that have been undertaken and that have been developed, the survey questionnaire, does collect a lot of data that can help measure some aspects of impact. I mean, there is a lot of scope for improving that still, but there are things like school attendance, employment, expenditures on energy, time spent on collecting energy sources and so on and so forth, which are clearly types of data that you would need to measure impact. So, I mean, I think the MTF, the framework itself, doesn't help you really measure impact, was not designed to measure impact. But on the other hand, apologies. Yeah, on the other hand, one, of course, can use the data that is collected through the survey instrument to really do some of this kind of impact measurement. And I have seen studies already that are trying to do that. So, yeah, apologies.
No problem.
Yeah, so basically, to answer your question simply, I think there is a lot of scope to use the MTF to do some kind of impact assessment, but it would really require additional effort and work outside of the framework to do that kind of impact measurement.
Yeah, indeed, I think it's also a question whether it is possible to collect this baseline and then also to track, being able to track what now per household this data, which hasn't been the purpose from ESMAP in its initial data collections. We have one question from the audience back in Ghana, Paddy. The multi-tier framework tries to bring many aspects of energy access together. As senior researchers, do you see any loophole or gaps in this MTF, or you take it as being comprehensive enough to measure energy poverty when we are talking about this comprehensive survey? What is your point of view?
Yeah, so I mean, I can start the discussion on that. I mean, as I already presented in the previous minutes, the MTF is very comprehensive, no doubt. It goes beyond the binary formulation that we want, but it's now complex for a lot of countries to really adopt, and it requires a lot of data. It's very data needy. So I think for global tracking purposes, not national, but for global tracking purposes, this needs to be simplified. And the alternative framework that we suggested is one way to simplify it. I'm not saying it's the best way or the only way. There can be, of course, other efforts to do that, but simplifying the framework to really distinguish those aspects and those dimensions that would have to do with supply and those that have to do with circumstances of the household or the end user, that's important. Simplifying the dimensions, focusing on key dimensions that are the most important in sort of reflecting energy poverty, that's important. And then also sort of simplifying the tiers, not having so many tiers, but simplifying the tiers is one or some of the ways in which this can be made perhaps more palatable to many more countries to adopt.
If somebody else has questions, you can unmute yourself or write them on the chat. Sebastian or Gunther, if you want to complement to Shonali's answer or to the previous questions that we had.
Well, as long as there is not another question, maybe just to complement to Shonali. Yeah, I think so. In my view, the multi-tier framework is like a toolkit that like can address many, if not all, the relevant questions. It's just it's so complex that we somehow, depending on what we want to, which question we want to address, we then need to specify it a bit. I think one important dimension that Shonali also mentioned is the question of whom we are talking about, right? So is it the enterprise level, is it the household level, but also is it the individual level? Because of course also within households we have different levels of energy poverty. for example, think about gender. So it's really more about the question of whether or how to really focus the aspect within the multi-tier framework to the question that you individually want to address.
Maybe, Natalia, if I may, just to add on to that, I also think, I mean, it's not about loopholes. It's rather about, are we always, you know, hitting the objective what we want to measure? And I think Shonali already made a good example with energy consumption being a very tricky indicator, because it completely ignores the issue of efficiency. And one more comment in general, I think is, I like your point, Gunther, when you said you need to have more data loggers. The question is obviously, of course, always how many can we afford at what sample size. But just to, from our perspective, I mean, we get 5-minute data on energy consumption, on battery voltage, on PV generation, and so forth. Obviously, with this data, you can do really good analysis, and you're not dependent on a survey which is taken once and then maybe after some time again. You actually get continuously flows of data. So for instance, now during the pandemic, we could learn a lot, like the way Europe was hamstering toilet papers, our customer were hamstering top-ups on their electricity meter, so they would be sure to have enough electricity during the lockdown. So these, of course, these I think notions you only get if you have continuous measurement. And for this, IoT devices are obviously ideal, but there's the question of cost, of course. Then.
Yeah, well, that works for those that already have electricity or are connected to somebody that has electricity and where can be purchased that electricity, right? To have this constant measuring, which will not be the case for the totally disconnected. Carlos Reed, a postdoc fellow at ISS, asks, thank you all for the interesting discussion. I'd appreciate to hear from the panelists if an assessment of energy planning processes is not missing in the MTF approach, meaning an evaluation of the quality of the processes. Carlos, do you mean for the process of collecting the data?
Yeah, thank you, Natalia. Thank you for the panelists. Actually, I guess that to achieve a good assessment on the energy poverty alleviation, the planning process are a very important part of the equation. And as I understand, the MTF doesn't address how to deal with the planning process at the national level or at the local level, subnational level. And I was wondering if somehow or how this could be connected, or if it is already connected, how this connects to MTF approaches and a complementary part of the analysis and evaluation towards the achievement of SDGs, for example. Thank you. I don't know if it was clear enough, but thank you.
Yes, Sebastian, would you like to take that one?
I would have voted for Shonali or Gunther, but as much as I recall, was from the first assessments that when you get, you get for every parameter you get an assessment, right? And then basically the recommendation was, okay, in your case it's reliability, so why don't you look at factors X, Y, Z because it's a reliability issue? Or in your case, the poorer tier performance was because of affordability, so why don't you look at financing options? So that's how I know the framework. So that is at least, that you get a set of tools or recommendations what you should emphasize in your energy planning. But I'm sure that.
Yeah, we are losing you and missing you as well. Shonali, you have to leave now, but maybe we have 2 more minutes, and Gunther will.
Sure. Sure. Thank you, Natalia. So, I mean, I completely agree with what Sebastian said right now in response to that question. So, I mean, of course, the MTF was not meant to be sort of an assessment, something that helps assess planning. It's meant to be a method to get data on tracking energy poverty and energy access. So it's a tool to give you inputs for planning. And so therefore, I mean, of course, one can argue, and I think there is merit in arguing for a closer connection between the two. But in fact, you know, the MTF itself is basically telling you where are the areas of concern and how sort of you should go about, sort of gives hints to planning on what they should emphasize, what they need to tackle most strongly in a given context. But yes, I mean, at the same time, I think there is a lot of potential for planning and tracking to go simultaneously and to kind of inform each other in some ways.
Yeah. Gunther, would you like to complete?
Yeah.
Or
well, I can only echo what has been said. So there are separate efforts to look at the energy planning processes. So well, maybe just to mention one, there is a recent report from the Global Commission to End Energy Poverty, who proposed a so-called integrated distribution framework, and there so in that sense there are separate let's say roundtables which also think about that question, which is definitely a very pertinent one. So governance is very critical to achieve energy access. Yes.
yeah, I will complete or finalize for Carlos. Actually, when it was originally designed from ESMAP, one of the main characteristics that was published around it was the possibility to do gap analysis, and how this gap analysis can inform policymakers on the goals. No, when you have this distribution of population in a specific tier ranking, so that policymakers can establish specific goals, moving people from tier 0 up to tier 1, 2, and from there plan their actions. Which I think what we haven't mentioned here is that this approach is technology agnostic. So it doesn't depend on which technology or power source people have in order to be ranked in a specific tier. Although it is possible to already do some kind of approximations to see which technology can rank people to a specific tier. And thank you, Shonali, for your participation. Thank you, Carlos, as well, for your question, and Pakangana. Achim, what do you say? If we have, not sure if we have more questions, or if we close now the hour of the Tuesday Talk.
Well, thank you. I mean, it depends very much on with how much time our speakers have left, actually, but I think it is not a problem to, let's say, go for another 5 minutes or so if there is any question or so left. It's up, of course, to the participants.
Yeah, I think for the participants, because usually Tuesday Talks is with another modality, like 30 minutes discussion. This has been a new setup with a conversation and more questions prepared from my side. But if somebody else has a question, let us know. Gunther and Sebastian are here, which is a privilege for all of us to have you still with us.
Oh.
Reda, you have your microphone on. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Reda.
Yes.
Okay, my name is Reda Agadi, and I am from the Pan-African University. Thank you, Professor Natalia, for the invitation for this great webinar. And thanks also to our speakers for the informative presentation. For me, I'd like just to know from our panelists, like their focus, their research focus, like if they are doing like research mostly focused on the tools, how to measure the energy access, or the process, how to improve the energy access. And also, in order to use that multi-tier framework, like what's the key what's the important keys to use to pass from tiers to tiers in order to accelerate the energy access?
Gunther, would you like to?
Just to clarify, so for your second question, you were referring to like the important steps.
What could be ways to accelerate the improvement from tier to tier?
Yes, exactly.
And I mean, of course, it very much depends on whether you want to move from tier 0 to tier 2 or from tier 2 to tier 4. So if you think about cook stoves, I think then I mean, there is still a lot of research to be done to really understand better where we are in terms of also transitional technologies that are out there that are cheap and that do not require the distribution channels as in the case of LPG, for example. So there are also what is called higher tier improved biomass cook stoves. So for those, I think I mean, we have at least in terms of cooking, we have a lot of different challenges out there. So we need to tackle the problem from different angles. One is from R&D, so really research on basic technologies, on improved, cleaner technologies that are also environmentally friendly. But then also like the enabling environment in the countries, the governance, and then the third thing is that we probably, at least for cook stoves, we also need end user subsidies. So I think if you have this mix of interventions and of sector support, then we will manage to move both, let's say, from the lower to the upper tier, medium tiers, but then also from the medium to the higher tiers. And yeah, for your first question on our, if I got it right, our research focus. So yeah, as I tried to mention in the beginning, so we try to look at different questions about energy access from an economic perspective, where we think about, okay, what are barriers, but also facilitators of energy access. So and we mostly look at it from the micro perspective. So using microeconometric approaches, impact evaluation approaches to address these questions. For example, there is one ongoing study in Senegal where we looked on the one hand at the health effects of improved cook stoves, but also try to see whether we can improve the supply side, taking into consideration especially the transportation costs that producers of improved cook stoves have. So yeah, that just a brief snapshot. Otherwise, I hope with simple Googling you will also find out our website and see the different projects that we are, and you'll also find my email address. So just feel free to connect if you have follow-up questions on that.
Thank you, Gunther.
Yeah, oh, sorry, Natalia.
Yes, Sebastian, I was going also to say that this discussion is very timely for the current conference that is happening from IRENA on statistics of renewable energies, and that it's taking place this week. I think thank you. Sebastian, you wanted to close your remarks?
Yeah, just a last word, and so because you were asking about the research, the colleague here from Powers. So in my case, the research is more and more into entrepreneurship and energy entrepreneurship and business models going over. I think that was your question, beyond the measuring of the access. I just wanted to close with this. And Natalia, thank you very much for organizing this. I think it was really cool. Thanks for inviting, and all the best. Greetings.
Thank you, Sebastian. And thank you, everyone, for participating. Thank you, Gunther, for your time as well.
Yeah, well, thanks also from my side. I mean, the privilege was completely mine. So I think, Natalia, you really managed to put a very nice schedule together, and well, happy to keep in touch with all of you. So yeah, thanks from my side.
Thank you. So Achim, I give you the last words to close up and give the last instructions.
Well, thank you very much all again also for the presentations. I have not much else to say. Thank you for being here. And as said, we have recorded the session and we'll make it available to all participants, including also the PowerPoint presentation if you would like to review it at a later stage. Beyond that, I would have nothing more to say and would just say, enjoy your day wherever you are, and see you at some point again, hopefully. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.